The origins of Vlachs and the Romanian people are, as I have noted in other videos, not easy to define because of the land of the Carpathian zone itself. In the early times, only a semi-nomadic shepherd culture prepared for war could make a living along the broken arc, over 900 miles long, across what is 7 countries today, the Carpathians. Groups of related peoples with a common lifestyle arose in the Balkan Mountains, the Pindus Mountains of Greece, and the Dinaric Alps in the west. All of these folk inherited a native network of laws passed through a common, Latin-based Creole, built on top of earlier languages like Dacian and Illyrian. These then mixed with Slavic languages and sprinkles of Greek and Albanian. The people of this new, highland shepherd civilization came to be called Vlachs, and a group of these ended up living further away from the others, in present-day Czechia, in the land of Moravia. They became Slavicized, proudly Czech, but kept a culture of their own which resisted the imperial power of the Habsburg dynasty during the wars of religion. In this video, we will look at the Czech lands centered around Moravia and what came to be known as the Vlach Uprisings, with its heartland of Vlachs. Hi, I'm Benjamin, and to tell you the story of the Vlach uprisings in Czech lands, I need to lay down 3 things first. 1, where do these people come from, these Vlachs, and who are they? 2, revolts don't just come out of nowhere, so you need a historical context, the kindling that allowed the fire to catch. And 3, we need to remember, these happened in the middle of the 30 Years' War, which drew in every country in Europe, indirectly or directly, leading to the deaths of around 8 million people over 30 years. It was a horrific time and one of the most intertwined, complex, chaotic moments in human history. So I need to explain some basic things for that before I can even get to the Vlach uprisings. If you want a video on the Vlachs dialect of Czech, with its influences from Vlach spoken language, let me know. But this is more about the history, the Czech resistance, and the Vlach contribution to that resistance. So let's get into it. There is no common agreement on where Vlachs originated in the centuries after Roman power disintegrated. The early records of these people in the 7th to 12th centuries are far to the south and the north of Greece. But we have to remember that the Byzantine Empire was the main place where people were literate at the time. It does not mean that there were not Vlachs for the north. It means that it was Greeks, and not other people, who were the first to write about them. Certainly by the 12th century, if not several centuries before, which is my opinion, Vlach populations were the majority on the plains north of the Danube, which is what would come to form the heartland of the Principality of Wallachia later, and of Romania itself. By the year 1300, Hungarian kings had invited Vlachs down from the mountains to settle their frontiers around Maramuresh. Here local rulers expanded east into Moldavia. See my video on the founding of this principality. For our discussion, they also moved north along the Carpathians. In the 1350s, King Louis I of Hungary, who had become more militant in his Catholicism, decreed that Vlachs who were not Catholic could not be given land by royal grant. This made them second-class citizens, and a group of Vlachs moved north over the border into the Kingdom of Poland, what would come to be called Ruthenia. Catholic bishops in Hungary wrote about Vlachs asking the king to force them to give up their nomadic lifestyle. It wasn't helping them keep power, was it? And in 1373, after the Kingdom of Hungary and Poland had unified in 1370 under King Louis I, Vlachs are recorded as living in present-day Ukraine. They were moving along the mountains to escape Hungarian laws against them. These people were fiercely freedom-loving, and they had their own legal system, called Vlach law. Further south, the Kingdom of Serbia passed laws banning Serbs from marrying Vlachs. Vlachs and Serbs married anyway, but it could have helped push more Vlachs to the north. We just don't know why exactly these people moved. Fortunately for the Vlachs, Hungary got a new king, Matthew Corvinus, who had some Vlach ancestry through his father. This meant he was not completely evil to them. But, it was a cruel time. Anyway, in 1474 he gave Vlachs the right, legally, to settle in the region of Liptov, present-day Slovakia, along his northwestern border, in a boundary land. This put them within 200 kilometers of Moravia, just over 100 miles away. But a small group of Vlachs were already in Moravia, and the term Vlašsko, meaning Wallachian country, was certainly in use by the time of the Black Army, an army of mercenaries created by Hungarian King Matthew Corvinus in 1458. And by this time, political and religious changes had swept Moravia, which we need to discuss now. I need to point out that Czechs and Germans were Christianized from opposite directions, right? So the Germans were Catholicized from the Frankish kingdom and the Latin Church of Rome. The Slavs generally, mostly, were Christianized through the Greek Empire of Byzantium and Church Slavonic, a language that would have been at least similar to them. So Germans were accustomed to a foreign language in their church, Latin, where the Slavs, they were more tied to their native languages. And so as German power grew and they began to impose Catholicism upon the Czechs didn't like that very much because they valued their language, and that led to tension. And Holy Roman emperors from that point began to think, how can they colonize these lands? How can they make them Catholic? How can they rule over them? With resentment of a foreign language and Catholicism being imposed on Czech lands, it was natural that Moravian Vlachs, treated unfairly by Hungarian Catholics, and the Czechs, who were being ruled over by German Catholics, formed a friendship. In the year 1400, a native Czech named Jan Hus, John the Goose, was ordained a Catholic priest. Unusually for his post, he promoted the Czech language and spoke out against the corruption of the church. Across Europe at the time, the church had become morally dishonest, and all Jan Hus really did, John the Goose, was tell the truth when other priests lied. This won him friends in Moravia and the south of Bohemia, and enemies in Prague and German lands. He sought reforms to the church and to give wine to the common people in services, not just bread. It was a heresy, a step too far. A movement gathered around him against the Pope in the middle of a papal schism, and he was burned at the stake as a heretic in 1415. After his death, a document was signed across Bohemia and Moravia by men of high rank in protest, calling those who believed Jan Hus's teachings were heretical, the worst of traitors. The people of Bohemia turned their back on papal teaching in Rome, Disorder broke out across the realm, and Catholic priests were driven out of their parishes. Sigismund of Luxembourg had helped end the Papal Schism in 1417. He also defeated the Ottoman Empire in battle and founded the Order of the Dragon, an order of military aristocrats who fought for the Catholic faith. When the King of Bohemia, Wenceslaus IV, died in 1419, Sigismund of Luxembourg, now ruling as Holy Roman Emperor, had legal right to the title King of Bohemia. The way that kingship and prince and lords and all that worked within the Holy Roman Empire was complicated, to say the least. If you want a video on that, let me know. What we need to know is that King Wenceslaus did not rule Moravia during this time. That was ruled by Jost, this guy. He aligned with Bohemian nobles in Prague to have Wenceslaus thrown in prison. But this was going on whilst Jan Hus, John the Goose, was preaching against the Pope, so King Wenceslaus sided with him to win over the peasantry, the Czech peasantry and the Vlachs. It worked. King Wenceslaus was a populist, a man of the people, to hold power. Robert of the Palatinate, this fellow, heard about his plan, changed sides, and led a small army to block Sigismund's path to Italy. So instead Sigismund had Wenceslaus thrown in prison. With Wenceslaus out of the way, Sigismund invaded Moravia the next year in 1403. Meanwhile, King Sigismund was not yet Emperor Sigismund, but he wanted the power. In 1402 he captured Wenceslaus, with the intention of taking him to Rome to force him to accept Sigismund as the emperor. But things happened. Because he wanted the silver mines of Moravia. Whilst he was away, Wenceslaus escaped from prison with the help of the House of Liechtenstein, who took him to Mikolov Castle, here, to organize resistance against Moravia. Wenceslaus overthrew the government put in place in Prague by Sigismund, and became King of Bohemia, a title claimed by Sigismund, but Moravia was ruled by Jost. In 1410, Robert of the Palatinate died, who was king of the Romans, and his title had nothing to do with the Romans. The next year in 1411, Jost died, who was king of the Germans, but ruled over Moravia, which had nothing to do with the Germans. Like I said, the title system in the Holy Roman Empire was complicated. The point is that Wenceslaus was ruler over these lands now, unrecognized by the Holy Roman Empire and having lost 2 allies and friends who would have backed him up in a fight. So he was a bit in a bad situation. So he gave up the Bohemian crown and took over Moravia, where the Vlachs are. However, neither the Czech aristocracy nor the common people were happy with this arrangement, and in 1415, they're like, who is this Catholic king, this emperor ruling over our lands, who actually helped to get our hero, Jan Hus, John the Goose, burned alive at the stake? We don't like this guy, they said. The followers of Jan Hus became Hussites, and they rose up. They pushed the German Catholics out of Prague, out of Moravia and southern Bohemia. In the summer of 1419, a mob of Hussites stormed the new town hall in Prague, throwing the king's representatives, the burgomaster, a town mayor basically, and town councillors, out of a window, killing several. This ignited a revolution in Czech lands against the Holy Roman Empire and the Kingdom of Hungary, which began the Hussite Wars. Hussites, followers of Jan Hus, the Goose. The Holy Roman Empire launched 5 crusades against the Czech heretics, from 1419 to 1434, with a Bohemian civil war in the middle, just to spice things up. The mighty Kingdom of Poland helped the Hussites at times, despite being Catholic, which shows how complicated the politics were, whilst the superpower Kingdom of Hungary supplied forces to their own rival, the Holy Roman Empire. Again and again, the Hussites repelled the Holy Roman Crusaders by inventing new battle tactics with wagons. If you would like a video on the Hussite Wars, let me know. What we need to know for Moravia is that most Moravian Vlachs sided with the Hussites against the empire, which shaped Czech and Vlach identity for centuries after, and still does today. Czechs and Vlachs became good friends, the best of friends, and began merging together as one people really early on. But Vlachko kept its unique identity, and for a time, its language. And the Hussites won incredible battles, outnumbered. In the 5 invasions that followed, 2 groups of Hussites, one radical and one moderate, began to oppose one another. In the 5th invasion launched by the Holy Roman Empire, the moderates, who were mostly the nobility, looking at their prestige and title, had enough of the radicals and the common people risking them losing a war against the empire, which would lose them their position. And in medieval times, you would not risk your land and title, would you? I know I wouldn't. So after 25 years of war, the moderates among the Czech nobility aligned with Catholics and crushed the radical Hussites at the Battle of Lipaně. Whilst the radical Hussites were defeated, the Hussites remained, and they had fought the Catholic Holy Roman Empire to a standstill, which is remarkable. I mean, the Czech lands are small, and they held off an imperial superpower that flanked them on 2 sides, was far more technologically advanced, and invaded them 5 times, almost always outnumbered, by using wagons in the mountains and early versions of sniper tactics. That is amazing, and if I were Czech, I would be proud of my people. The peace treaty afterwards, in 1434, reached a sort of compromise between the Church of Rome and the Hussites, in which they were allowed to exist, but not able to hold office. Basically, Hussites became tolerated second-class citizens, as long as they did not get any ideas above their station. The Kingdom of Hungary next door, a Catholic superpower faced with Muslims to the south and Orthodox Christianity to the east, did not like the idea of another non-Catholic state on its doorstep. So in 1468, King Matthias Corvinus of Hungary invaded, with the excuse that they were not Catholic, these heretics, and seized Moravian lands, as well as having the Czech Catholic estates crown him king over Bohemia. However, his reach was limited, and most of the Czech lands were still loyal to their own king, George of Poděbrady, who was of Moravian origin and of Vlach heritage. He was a Hussite, not a Catholic. George was a very tolerant man for his age, it must be said, and he tried to reach peace with Catholics. He probably prevented a war. In my opinion, it could be that because he had ancestry from Romania, he was able to understand different faiths and ethnic groups, allowing him to use power across social divides, where his competitors in the Holy Roman Empire and their Germanic-centered worldview could not. King George was able to stop King Matthias of Hungary from conquering more than Moravia, but Moravia was lost for a time, and after King George died in 1471, his followers did something unexpected. They turned to the son of the Polish king for help, choosing Vladislaus II as heir to the Bohemian crown, who was at this time fighting to be king of Hungary as a rival to King Matthias. Vladislaus attempted to reconquer Moravia for the Czechs, and failed. What made their choosing Vladislaus strange is that he was a militant Catholic, and at once began to re-Catholicize Czech lands. The people rose up, killing Germans and Jews and expelling Catholic clerics. Rebellions swept through central and northeastern Czech lands. King Vladislaus knew he could not run his economy without Jews, so he allowed Hussite aldermen to take official positions so that he could continue employing Jews in his government. What that means is that he could not give Jews rights without giving Hussites rights as well, because Jews were beneath Hussites in the social hierarchy. The divide between Catholics and Hussites remained across Moravia until the religious peace of Kutná Hora in 1485, which Vladislaus himself organized, bringing a much-needed end to the conflict. As a side note, which if I do not mention, none of this will make sense, the Protestant Reformation was begun in 1517 by Martin Luther and his declaration at Wittenberg. It spread through northern Germany, the Netherlands, up into Scandinavia, and into England, rapidly breaking away from the Catholic world, causing violence in an arc from the Spanish Netherlands and what is now Belgium, running through the middle of Germany and into Bohemia, over the mountains and down into Moravia and into Hungary. An anti-imperial alliance began to form against the Habsburg dynasty and the Spanish Empire. Europeans were about to kill themselves for 130 years over the question of how one is allowed to communicate with God. But first, an enemy arose out of the east. In the late 15th century, European resistance against the Islamic Empire of the Ottomans began to crumble. Over the 16th century, the Ottoman Turks swept over southeastern Europe, north of Bulgaria. In 1521, Belgrade was lost to the Islamic power. In 1526, disaster came at the Battle of Mohacs, and in 1541, the invaders captured Buda, the historical Hungarian capital, leaving what remained of Free Hungary as a rump state propped up by German powers, with Ottoman Turks ruling all over the Balkans. There was resistance from Albania to Croatia, but Albania fell, and Croatia had to be propped up by the Austrian powers. The rolling military advance of the Turks over Serbia and Hungary to the doorstep of the Czech lands was bad for them in more than one way. Catholics became more militant and saw dissent from the Church as a threat to their unity and a common cause to defeat the Islamic threat to our civilization. Shortly after, Tartars and Turks began raiding Moravian lands, stealing children and women to sell them in the slave markets of the Muslim world. The Turks built an entire economic industry on capturing European Christians and Jews to sell them as slaves, to impregnate their women and then take their children away from them to be raised in military training schools, or married off to grown men without seeing them again. Moravia, being between the Holy Roman Empire, the Rump state of Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire, was subject to attacks by Turks and Tartars from 1529 to 1701, with more frequent raids after 1599. So these Moravian Vlachs had to defend mountain passes against an imperialist empire from the east as well, vastly outnumbered, whilst having their children stolen, as the Holy Roman Empire that ruled them did nothing. In the 1580s, a Moravian Vlach named Václav Vratislav from Mitrovice, who travelled to Turkish-occupied Constantinople with an imperial Habsburg group of envoys, wrote about seeing the Christian slaves taken by the Turks from Moravia, having no idea that he would later himself be captured by the Turks in Moravia and taken to Muslim lands as a slave. He wrote, 300 chariots with poor prisoners were brought to Constantinople. Each of these had to carry 5 or 6 heads of Christians. I saw women, children, girls, and little infants. It was so sad to look at them. Women holding children at their breasts, carrying 1-year-old or 2-year-old children in their arms. Some merchants buy a mother separately. Another buys a child. Another a boy, another a girl. So prisoners from one family go to different regions and never find each other. The chronicler Pavel Urbanez wrote, in 1605, the 4th Sunday after Easter, just 3:30 in the night, they rushed on us from the direction of Skalice, and they immediately began to slay us, to take away our goods. Some were beaten so hard that they died in their hands. Women and virgins were disgraced, and the Hungarians sold them to the Tatars. Cities, towns, villages, yards, mills, and huts were burned. This day we saw the whole Moravian and Austrian landscape in fire, almost turned to ruins. Tatars, Turks, and Hungarians broke across the Slavic and Moravian borders to Broderhetske and wanted the city to be subjugated to them. Then they beat the drunken guard, quietly entering the town of Strasnice. Knocking on the houses of the richest burghers, they killed those who opened the door. Another key thing here to note is that King Louis II, or King Ludwig in Czech, had died at the Battle of Mohács in 1526, leaving Bohemia and the Czech lands without an heir to their crown. I went into all that, the burning of Jan Hus, John the Goose in 1419, the Peace of Kutny-Hora in 1485, the loss of a king at the Battle of Mohács, which left them without a king, and then the rise of Catholic Ferdinand as their king, who began imposing Catholicism upon them and making them second-class citizens in their lands. All the Hussite wars, all of that, for a reason, is that rebellions do not just spring up out of nowhere, and it needed kindling before a spark could catch a fire. The year is 1608. A Protestant revolt in Transylvania has been crushed by Matthias II, King of Hungary and Croatia. But a Czech revolt had broken out against the Holy Roman Empire. Again, Matthias II, who wants to be emperor, marches an army into Prague and aligns with the rebels in Moravia against the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II. Matthias hopes for a confrontation, which he would win, making him emperor over the empire. But Rudolf plays his hand well, and publicly offers Matthias the lands of Moravia and Austria along his Hungarian borders. If Matthias refuses the offer, he will never become emperor. If he accepts the offer, He can never challenge Rudolf publicly again without facing multiple armed revolts and questions of legitimacy. Matthias accepts peace and takes Moravia. That same year in 1608, a man in Moravia named Arkleb Prysinovsky, Lord of Vikov, died. He left a widow named Lucrezia as owner over his lands at Vasetin in Vlachs. Seeing that Catholic kings now ruled over both Moravia and Bohemia, the family thought it wise for her to marry Albrecht of Wallenstein. This man, a rising star in the Austrian court, and a radical militant Catholic who supported the Counter-Reformation, Wallenstein acquired the Vasetin estates of Moravia, a significant amount of land in an area full of Moravian Vlachs. Meanwhile, Emperor Rudolf was still trying to limit Matthias's power, so he wrote a letter of majesty in 1609, granting religious tolerance through the empire, which went against Matthias's plans in Moravia. There was nothing Matthias could do except depend on his local Catholic aristocracy, and this is where Albrecht of Wallenstein comes in. Wallenstein brought in the Catholic Jesuit order and began to re-Catholicize the peasants, who resisted in 1612 and were punished with raids by Wallenstein's men. That same year, Rudolf II, Holy Roman Emperor and King of Bohemia, died, triggering an election for a new Holy Roman Emperor. Matthias was chosen. Earlier on, he had been a moderate in religious matters and quite tolerant for his time, but after crushing a peasant revolt within Austria itself, he changed his mind and went around attacking Protestants. Not good for Czechs and their Hussite ideas. However, Matthias came into conflict with Wallenstein's Jesuits in Czech lands through his loyal Cardinal Melchior Klesel, who sought peace between the empire's different confessions. I guess the Cardinal was smart because anyone with half a brain could see that a major war was coming, and anyone sensible was trying to stop it. In 1617, Matthias chose an heir to the throne of Bohemia, Archduke Ferdinand, a militant Catholic opposed by Czech aristocracy. Now Prince of Bohemia, Ferdinand began setting up a network to impose Catholicism upon the aristocracy through his representatives in Prague. Do you remember earlier on when the Hussites threw town councillors out a window, triggering an armed revolution and the Hussite Wars? Yeah, this happened again, 199 years later, in 1618, in almost the same place, and it triggered 30 years of war across most of Central Europe. This event is so important that there are multiple classical paintings showing it, like this one by Czech painter Václav Brožík. What happened was this. 4 Protestant lords met at the Bohemian chancellery, who were angry at Prince Ferdinand. He had stopped allowing the building of Protestant churches. There was also confusion about what the Letter of Majesty meant for royal lands in Bohemia, and how the Holy Roman Empire was using it. When Bohemian estates had protested, Ferdinand had their assemblies dissolved by force. Count Thorn, the leader of the Protestant lords, is quoted as saying to 2 of the emperor's representatives, "You are enemies of us and of our religion, have desired to deprive us of our Letter of Majesty, have horribly plagued your Protestant subjects, and have tried to force them to adopt your religion against their wills, or have had them expelled for this reason." Then to the Protestant crowd gathered, he said, "Were we to keep these men alive, then we would lose the Letter of Majesty and our religion, for there can be no justice to be gained from or by them." Count Thorn then had the 2 men thrown from the window of Prague Castle, a 70-foot fall, which both men miraculously survived, but it was a declaration of revolt against the empire. This revolt would have ended rather quickly, if not for an untimely event, or timely, depending on whose side you're on. The Holy Roman Empire Matthias died unexpectedly. Protestant estates in the lands of the Bohemian crown and the Catholic Habsburgs began preparing for war. The next year, in 1619, the Vlachs in Moravia won a significant battle over the empire at Dolní Věstonice. With momentum on their side, the rebels did something very dangerous. They declared Frederick V of the Palatinate along the Rhine River, over 400 miles away to the west, to be their king, and applied to join the Protestant Union, hoping to bring large swathes of Germany into the war on their side. It partially worked, but not really. It certainly got people fighting each other across Germany. Frederick V assembled an army to defend his claim. We have to remember that Emperor Matthias was dead, and the new emperor, Ferdinand, had to get his house in order first. This gave the rebels time. Prince Christian of Anhalt, with Swedish and German alliances, led the rebel army. The imperial army brought a large force from Spanish lands, and this is key for what would happen later. The imperial army swept over western Bohemia, and in November 1620 they met at White Mountain, or Bílá hora, near Prague. The rebels were crushed. The Bohemian revolt was over, but not really. The 30 Years' War had begun, and the first battle had been won by the Empire. No one knew this at the time, and Emperor Ferdinand was too harsh. He banned other religions in Bohemia, converted the Czechs by force, and took the property of Protestant nobles. The Hussites of Moravia were crushed. Hundreds of thousands went into exile. 27 leaders of the revolt were executed. Prince Christian fled to his allies in Sweden, who would later launch an invasion. Frederick V fled to the Netherlands, who agreed to support him in fighting the Spanish they were at war with, to reclaim his lands in Germany along the Rhine. In Moravia, bands of Vlachs regathered in the mountains and reached out to the rebellious Hungarian king, Bethlen Gabor. At the beginning I said that rebellions do not just come out of thin air. They don't. The Vlachs, remember them? They still followed Vlach law. Their own legal system carried with them up from the mountains of the Balkans centuries ago at this point, and the Holy Roman Empire did not like this differentness between the two of them. Neither did they like the Czech religion of the Hussites. They wanted to erode these two identities, Czech and Vlach, and so these two fought with each other, merging into a common resistance against the empire. The Wallachian chronicler, André Civy, from Vlašské Meziříčí, wrote down the following words about the emergence of this uprising in Vlašsko. On December 2nd, 1620, Wallachians stormed Lukov Castle and killed many soldiers. On January 2nd, 1621, Wallachians of Vsetin invaded Mlinovice and killed the soldiers. January 8th, they invaded Vyžovice again, taking a lot of silver and money. On January 12th, they invaded Zlín and Lukov again. They picked up a lot of booty everywhere. Then they went where they could, beating and killing the imperial soldiers. They had keys from the town of Meziříčí. Also the people of Rožnov went with him. They had their own headmen as governors. They attacked the bishop's domains. They plundered and took the booty where they could. They had been doing these strange things for several years. No one was allowed to tell them anything, for he would be in danger of his life immediately because they were evil. Even though the empire had crushed the Bohemian revolt, Moravia was between the empire, Poland, and Hungary, with mountains to the east and north. This was ideal country for guerrilla warfare against a larger enemy, and the Holy Roman Empire did not want to get bogged down fighting a bunch of Vlach peasants in the mountains. And so, whilst the revolt had died down in Bohemia, it was not actually over. Each summer, Vlachs went around pillaging, or attacking imperial soldiers where they could. A Moravian knight who had led rebels in the Bohemian Uprising, Jan Adam of Vikov, a Czech advisor to King Frederick V, and turned the random groups into an army. His power base was around Vsetin, the Vlach core of Vlachsko. At the Battle of Dolní Věstonice, the Moravians had won 2 years before. A man named Ladislav Velen, Lord of Zerotin, had led the army. He now called for Czechs to rally under the rebel King Frederick V, with the army itself led by Jan Adam, who the Vlach people trusted. Then Vladislav gathered forces from Olomouc and began marching through the hills of southeastern Moravia. He even captured the castle Brumov, quite a prize. It meant rebels held the entry points to Moravia from the south and could slowly strangle the towns leading to Prague. Through the Hungarian king Bethlen Gabor, an alliance was built with the Prince of Silesia to the north, Jan Karnovsky, of the mighty Hohenzollern dynasty, which would eventually rule Romania and the German Empire. Karnovsky invaded from the northeast into Moravia, with an army joined up by Jan Adam and his Vlach followers, uniting with the rebel Hungarian king. Near Brno, Jan Adam of Vikov visited Lipnik nad Bečvou, where he was welcomed by the Lord Councillors and Old Councillors, and his army feasted with support from the local aristocracy. To his east, only Hukvaldi Castle resisted the Wallachian Hungarian troops. By November, both Jan Adam and Johann George approached Olomouc and attacked it. However, despite all their efforts, they failed to conquer the city. This was a setback. In early 1622, the Holy Roman Emperor Ferdinand II convinced Bethlen Gabor of Hungary to make peace. The Prince of Silesia withdrew his army to the north, and the Moravians had no choice but to give up direct military action. Jan Adam, however, continued to fight, even as several of the rebellion's aristocratic leaders fled to Hungary and Poland. It seemed things were settling down, but there was no law and order in the land. With war raging elsewhere, many of the valleys of Moravia were left abandoned to Vlach control, their castles without sufficient guard. So Jan Adam organized an army of 300 rebels in the forests of Vlachko around Vsetin, and by May his force had grown to over 1,000 men, which took over the Vlachko area. His plan was a cunning one, to march north and take Klasko, now in Poland, which would open the road to reinforcements by Protestants in Prussia and along the Baltic Sea. Jan Adam was trying to bring other powers into the war, now raging 400 miles in the west in the Rhineland of Frederick V's Palatinate. 2 years before, after the failure of the Bohemian Uprising, a Spanish-born Austrian cardinal who had studied in Czech lands, named Franz von Dietrichstein, had been appointed governor over Moravia and ordered to turn it back to Catholicism. He brought in Jesuits and let them confiscate property of non-Catholics, which he then took over. Naturally, Cardinal Dietrichstein became the richest man in Moravia. Through a defector in Jan Adam's army, Cardinal von Dietrichstein was able to capture up to 200 of the leading rebels. Jan Adam's plans were smashed. Some of the leaders were executed in Brno and Olomouc. Jan Adam, however, escaped with a band of men, who then plundered the cardinal's personal castle at Kelch. Jan Adam was sending the cardinal a clear message: "Let's make it personal if you want, buddy." However, facing the empire with only a few hundred men, Jan Adam chose exile and accepted secret missions between Hungarian rebels and the Dutch on opposite sides of the empire which would allow him to focus on finding allies between them. The next year in 1623, around 12,000 Polish Cossacks rode into the country and pillaged its wealth. Now that is some hard luck, isn't it? You lose a revolt and then 12,000 random Polish people invade. 300 Moravians died around Wysetin alone. Meanwhile, Prince Krnowski had fled to Lvovcha, far in the east of the Carpathians, in today's Slovakia, which became a center of resistance for people all along the Carpathian range who did not want to be found. However, history is not always fair to the brave and good, and he died penniless. His principality in Silesia fell into chaos. After this, it would seem to outsiders that the revolt in the land of Moravia was over, but Jan Adam had friends in Denmark, and in 1625, the English and Dutch agreed to finance a Danish invasion of the Holy Roman Empire. For the English, Spain was the main rival in the New World. For the Dutch, they were fighting a war of independence against Spain. And for the Danish, there was trade at stake, and Saxony, with trade routes into the Baltic, risked falling to the Catholic Empire. You couldn't have people cutting in on your business, could you? Maybe it would be better to kill them before they got any ideas. Keep in mind, the Vlachs around Wysetin and Velasco had not formally surrendered. Not even the Polish raids had finished them off. Maybe the rebellion was not a fire at this point, but its embers were still hot, and Jan Adam was keen to help it catch fire again. In the spring of 1626, the Danish army was defeated by Wallenstein near Magdeburg in Germany. They were able to cross Saxony into Silesia and escape, and since Prince Krnowski had died, leaving the land in chaos, they met little resistance from the Catholic imperial forces of the Holy Roman Empire there. However, they had been defeated in battle, and so the allies Jan Adam rode into Moravia with were much weaker than he had hoped for. But with Danish help, the Vlach rebels took all the lands between Silesia and Holešov, and crushed an imperial counterattack at Holešov, allowing them to make this a base for the rebels. On a side note, Holešov is important for the Jewish people, and it became a focal point of Jewish mystic scholars in the following decades, like Shabbatai HaKohen, this guy. Another man who became wealthy from taking the lands of non-Catholics after the defeat of the rebels at White Mountain was Baltasar Maradas, this guy. And now Wallenstein put him in charge of driving the rebels out of Holešov, which he did. Wallenstein himself attacked the Danish army, and slowly drove them back into Silesia by 1627. Jan Adam still held Lukov Castle in the Zlín region, a significant prize. Legend has it that he died in battle defending the castle, but his death is surrounded in mystery, befitting of a folk hero. The revolt fell silent for most of the next decade. The Holy Roman Emperor faced a war against multiple powers, supporting insurgents within his own borders and rebellious states, and did not have the time to focus on clearing out peasant bandit Vlachs in the mountains of Moravia. But those Vlach rebels were still there, around Wysetin and Zlín. The lands of Velasco and eastern Moravia kept them safe from imperial eyes for the moment. The empire used Prague over the mountains as a center point for its troops, from which to fight various Protestant states within the empire to the north and west of Czech lands. In 1630, the Kingdom of Sweden, under its charismatic warrior king, Gustavus Adolphus, invaded the empire. After an epic string of battles across central Germany and a rise and fall which deserves its own video, the Swedes had lost their great king in battle in 1632, but continued to carve a path of destruction across central Germany under Field Marshal Torstenson 6 years later, in 1638, the Swedish army marched through Moravia. I guess if you love your king, you want revenge, right? The Moravian Vlachs rose up. Thousands joined the Swedes, and all of central and northern Moravia passed into rebel and Swedish hands. Vlachs, armed with professional Swedish weaponry now, forced an army of imperial soldiers to surrender at Rukenice. This was a big victory for a revolt made up of mostly peasants. Slowly they took over the south of Moravia too, making raids out of the mountains of Vlachs, their base. Brno fell to the rebels in 1643, a key point to hold geographically an intersection of valleys. At this point, Field Marshal Torstensson returned to Sweden, and Emperor Ferdinand III had enough of this rebellion. The Holy Roman Emperor sent Jan Christoph III into Moravia, giving him legal power to kill people at random. Ferdinand III had come to power in 1637, logically after Ferdinand II. His main platform was that he wanted the wars over, and to do so the lands of the crowns of Bohemia, that is Czech lands, Silesia and Moravia, had to be violently suppressed and unified into his realm under the crown of one crown and made Catholic without question. 3 imperial armies were sent into Moravia from different directions. It has been noted that these armies had executioners following them. They intended to wipe out the Vlach population. Vsetin, the rebel stronghold in the mountains, was the last to fall. In late January of 1644, the Battle of Vsetin. In truth, it was not much of a battle. This was a massacre. About 700 Moravian defenders fell, including a few dozen Swedes. Several Vlach villages were burned, and at least 20% of the male population was killed. Men fleeing into Hungary were pursued by Habsburg troops. Across Vlachs, about 30% of the whole Vlach population was wiped out. Within this, there were official executions of leaders, among the worst in Czech history, with 200 lives lost through beheading, hanging, and quartering. Many were also hung around Brno. Non-Catholic religions were banned, and I should add that the Jewish population was forced out. Not all hope was lost, though, and Vlach resistance continued in the form of bandits for decades afterwards, with partisans hiding out in Poland and Hungary. However, let's not get romantic, shall we? Organized armed revolt in the Vlach lands was over. The next century would see smaller uprisings, but as an ethnic group, the Vlachs of Vlachs were broken. In religious matters, Catholicism was officially their religion, but many kept their faith in secret. Smaller revolts flared up now and then, but they were quickly crushed. In 1781, Holy Roman Emperor Joseph II issued the Patent of Tolerance, which allowed non-Catholic Christians some level of religious freedom, but by this time, the Hussite nature of religion was gone. Jews in the Czech lands, however, would have to wait another year. It is a miracle that any sense of Vlach identity survived at all. But it did, and it has, and that is a testimony to the resilience of this people. Thank you very much to my Patreons on the screen now. Diolch yn fawr iawn am wylio. We'll see you next time.